An outspoken supporter of President Trump's immigration policies has been named the acting director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Former Virginia Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli, the Cooch, is replacing former Director Lee Francis Sisna, who was forced out during a shakeup last month, one reportedly orchestrated by White House policy advisor Stephen Miller.
Cuccinelli begins the job as the Trump administration works to finalize an agreement with Mexico to deal with illegal immigration. Monday, President Trump announced the two countries had come to an understanding, but vowed to place tariffs on Mexico if the country's legislative body does not approve the plan. Joining us now to explain the logistics of the fight over immigration is the Assistant Professor of Public Policy at George Mason University, Justin Gest. He's exploring the concept of a Moneyball approach to immigration. He's also one of the founders of the Migration Studies Unit at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Professor, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
So tell us a little bit about this Moneyball approach to immigration. It's not purely merit-based. You've taken issue with a points-based system. How does it differ from our current family-based system?
Well, it is purely merit-based. It's just looking at merit in a different way. There's lots of forms and ways that people can merit being admitted into the United States. There's merit in having family here. There's merit in speaking multiple languages. There's merit in visiting the country before and demonstrating that you have an affinity for the place and that you're used to being here before. So I think there's lots of ways of thinking about merit. But what really stimulated this was just realizing that baseball teams do a more sophisticated job of selecting their players than we currently do in the United States of selecting our new immigrants.
So, I'm familiar with the entire sabermetrics universe, and that's a fascinating concept to use data-driven analytics to apply to what is ultimately purely a social policy. But can you talk about why should we be doing merit at all? That's not what the Statue of Liberty says, right? Give us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses. Shouldn't we just be allowing anyone into the country? Of course, thinking about criminal history and assuming they're not a known problem or threat to the United States and our safety, why shouldn't we just be allowing anyone in?
Well, allowing anyone in is going to lead to a lot of destabilization of the population. You're going to have a lot of people rushing in without necessarily knowing that there are jobs available, that there's a capacity in society to accept them and make sure that they're properly integrated into the United States, which both creates trouble for the United States, but also trouble for the immigrants themselves. What you ultimately want is a balance, something where we have labor needs satisfied, families reunified, people rescued from danger and disaster, to be the humanitarian country that the United States has been. But at the same time, in a way that's balanced with our priorities as a country, in the sense that we're trying to ensure prosperity and also population stability.
I think that's very interesting, and I agree with an outcome-based approach. The real question is unlike baseball, where you're dealing with purely athletic ability, how can you score for potential outcome beyond anything other than really education? What are the biggest predictors for success in the United States?
Sure. Well, Moneyball is a simplification, right? I mean, baseball and immigration are not the same things. And in baseball, one of the things that you have an advantage of is you know exactly the outcome you want, wins. And the way you get wins is with runs. Well, with immigration, it's not quite as simple. And the reason why it's not as simple is that we don't all agree on the outcomes that really matter. But the outcome's not really education, Sagar. The outcome that you're looking for, education is something that usually...
Well, it's a predictor
It's a predictor,
outcome, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
But that's the challenge, is developing what are the outcomes that really matter to us. And for some people, it's about obeying the law. It's that simple. I want people here who obey the law. Well, for other people, it's about I want people who are employed. I want people who make lots of money to contribute tax dollars. I want people who are creating jobs and innovating. I want people who are raising good families. I want to actually rescue other people. Maybe the outcome's not about us, but it's about them, people who we can help the most. So there are different outcomes, and people disagree about what integration really means. And I think that this should challenge us. Any kind of perspective on immigration, whether it's Moneyball or otherwise, should challenge us to ask ourselves, what really ultimately matters for us? And I think that thinking about things in a broader way that actually recognizes merit beyond just a single, one-dimensional way of thinking about human beings is better.
I think so as well. And what my greatest issue with the merit-based system, even though I am a believer in the merit-based system, is that reducing human beings to an outcome-based approach is gross. Because there are several scenarios of this in which you can see somebody who might be a high productivity individual who refuses to integrate, who refuses to absorb the broader cultural norms of that. The real question is, can you score for cultural integration? I think that's what it is how do you score for and reduce people to creating a society? Because this might be the one case where, outside of baseball, where they were all saying hunches and they had their old wives' tales about what made somebody a great player and what not, with immigration, it's really a question of the soul of a nation. I'm not sure that it can be reduced to that, though we can try.
Well, with cultural integration, it's really hard to see that in the first generation.
Right.
You know, I think ultimately we have to take a longer view of immigration, so that we're not just thinking about it in the next few years, but we're thinking about the next generations, right? Their second generation, third generation, are their children integrated? And the United States actually has a very good record of integrating, over generations. The problem is that politics is a very short time scale. We want to see the results right away, and that's just not how immigration works. I think we should be thinking long term, and the way I think long term is bringing in people who are going to be successful, raise successful children. It will lead to their integration into the United States ultimately. That's what history has shown us. But with merit, Sagar, the really important part here is recognizing that there is not just one way of thinking about merit. It's not just about how educated you are. I'm a very educated person. I can tell you that is only a small dimension of who I am. Right? I'm much more than my own educational credentials. And so are other people. They're more than their fathers, their sisters. They are also linguists in many cases. They're human beings who have visited places before and actually have some experience at those places. And they also have personality types and dispositions that predispose them for success or not. And I think that we can actually, if we actually think about things in a more data-driven way, collect the data, see what the outcomes are over time, and then select people according to those predictors that suggest that they're actually going to be successful in the United States, we're on board.
Couldn't agree more.
Where does this put us, merit-based, broad-based merit-based approach, or a more narrow view of merit? Where does this put us in the global scheme of immigration policy? I mean, I think about, once you travel the world a little bit, you see that people, the poor people of the world who are in search of better opportunity, they want to go to places that are democracies, that have free markets, that have wide and broad opportunity to create a better life for themselves and future generations. So it's not just the United States. You have Germany, you have Japan, you have England, you have the Romance-speaking countries of the world. Where are we in terms of our competitiveness on the global scale as a place for immigrants to want to come to seek a better future?
Well, there was a time when the United States was sort of leading the way in terms of how immigration is governed. For better or worse, some of our policies were not very humane. These days, though, we are really trailing behind in many ways. We are the outlier in the world, and not because we're sort of innovating and doing new things, but actually because our policy is stuck in this kind of formaldehyde. We're stuck in 1960s policies, and we haven't updated them to what the rest of the world is doing. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that what the rest of the world is doing is good from a humanitarian perspective. Policies have shifted from being family-oriented to now being very economically oriented, about demonstrating that you have a contract already, formal education, right, labor market gaps. And many people believe that that's a strong way of improving your economy. We don't actually know, though, that family reunification doesn't provide the same outcomes.
Right.
And of course, it's possible to have a family member in a country and to have a PhD. It's possible to be a chemical engineer and be a mother, right, of someone who's already in the country. So it's not mutually exclusive to both have family heritage in a country already, to have an advanced degree, and to maybe even be coming from a country in danger. A lot of refugees come over with family in the United States already and with advanced degrees. What if we had a system that actually took all those things into consideration and said, wow, you're the perfect candidate because we know so much about you now. Right now, we're basically selecting people just because they have a master's. We know so much more.
Right. What I like about all of this is in at least a rethinking of the immigration system. The most important point that you made is that our current immigration law is governed by the 1960s. It has literally not changed since, except for a few tweaks here and there. And a fundamental rethinking, just think about how different the economy is since 1960s. Think about how different we are as a nation. How is it that immigration, which is the policy of deciding who we are and who we will be for the foreseeable future, is not embedded in our immigration law? And I think that's the most important part of what you're saying, is let's at least fight about the future. Let's not fight about keeping the past or about wholesale restriction or whatever have you.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of concern about ditching the system right now because it has been such a successful way of reunifying families together. And family, of course, is a very important part of who we are as Americans. But my point is that you can still appreciate people's family ties in a system that also considers educational credentials, likelihood of employment, previous visits to the country, and the possibility that we may be rescuing people from disaster. We can bring these things together at one, still respecting the value of family.
That's an excellent point. Thank you,
Professor
Doctor.
Justin Gest, George Mason University. Thank you for joining us. Great
Pleasure.
conversation.
Appreciate it. Next on Rising, the House Freedom Caucus is one of the most influential groups in the U.S. Congress.
But where does their power come from? A new book by author Matthew Green raises the veil. Our conversation next as Rising continues.